Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you again with Dr. Abdul to really take a little deeper dive into spirituality and its role in holistic healing. So, Dr. Abdul, I'm going to start, but, you can feel free to interject. But I think it was important to really let everybody knows that this talk is not about religion. Okay, we understand that people have different faith, and as we're talking about our own spiritual journey, people will see like me and you, we have different faith, but
Mhm.
when we talk about spirituality, it's really the, I'm going to say the spirit in us that unite all of us. So in holistic, we talk about mind, body, spirit. So when you're addressing healing, so it's the whole. It's not a fragmented part of us. It's the whole. So we think it was very important to really understand the role of spirituality and what do we mean by that, in terms of holistic healing. It's really based on an understanding that we are all spiritual beings. Okay, I know a lot of people hear the term we are spiritual beings having a human experience. The first time I heard that, it did not make too much sense to me because it was that. But at the end of the day, through my journey, my spiritual journey, I realized that, oh, it is because
Mhm.
it's really who we are at the core. And when we are working with people in terms of mental health and even physical health, okay, there's an element of faith, in everybody's healing. When we talk about spirituality, it's really that deep connection that we have with what I would call the God within us. So you can call it God, you can say Allah, Jehovah, whatever name, Buddha, whatever name you want to give to that force, that spiritual, force that we all are connected as one. We want to make sure that this is what we're talking about, not religion, and how it's really promote healing in mental health, because we believe that, especially in our community, the major factor in mental health illnesses is really trauma. At the base
Mm.
of it, it's really
Yes.
trauma.
Mhm.
That's why a lot of the work we do, we said it's trauma informed, because
Right.
it's almost like the universal precaution, in medicine, where like one time, you have to kind of like assume that probably everybody can have something that, that can cause you to be infected. So everybody wear gloves, they wear all those things as a precaution. And universal precaution in trauma is that, really assuming that everybody will come to you. There's some kind of element of trauma. As Black people, and I'm going to say, as Black or people of color,
Yes.
it is really, really important that we are understanding what happened to us. Even we talk about spiritual trauma. When
Mhm.
you were taking from your continent, you were separated from what you know as your God. You were separate for all your spiritual practices. And
Yes.
then you come to a new world where everything about you, your religion, everything become the devil. It's
Yes.
become black magic. It's become all those things. I remember, even, I had some spiritual tapes that I used to let have my kids watch, um, and they were talking about God and the image of God. And every time they talk about the devil, it's a dark skinned, person. And
Uh-huh.
then when God, it's a light skinned person. So
Mhm.
it's like Black people are unconsciously programmed to look in the mirror and see themselves as the devil,
Mhm.
because it's really the devil look like you. So I came from Haiti, and it was later on I started looking a little bit into voodoo and really look at, like there was nothing really bad or devil about, that religion.
Mm-hmm.
Our, I'm going to say, our father of liberty, we can say, the freedom, because everybody knows Haiti is the only Black republic that really had a successful revolt. And
Yes.
that revolt started with, Bookman, a voodoo priest who
Mm-hmm.
rallied the troop and really um, uh, connect them to their spiritual being, to who they are. And there will be a link to really look at, the Bookman prayer. Bookman prayed to God. Bookman did not really know anything about the devil, even, referring to white was oppressing, the Black. He referred to everything as it's more like, you can use God to do good and you can use God to do bad. So that was, really the philosophy. So I want to put that into perspective, because a lot of time, even in our community, there's all this division about God, good and bad, and people are really not united around, like our humanness or our spiritual, us as spiritual being. So I will talk a little bit more, as I'm talk more about, that, but that at least, I wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page when we talk about spirituality today and the connection to holistic healing. It's really about the connection to the self and the spiritual being that we are.
Yes. It's kind of amazing because I was looking up after you and I had talked about this and you told about your experience. I was actually looking up um, the religions in Western Africa where we, you know, came from as African people. And, there were things that I didn't know about these religions. I didn't know that, first of all, the religion was monotheistic. They believed in one God. They believed in the ancestors and their connection to God. It was really interesting, and it was very much grounded in peace, in connection to the earth, in connection to you know how we relate to each other, and just the way that these religions have been characterized has been so warped. It's so far away from what the religions actually mean and believe. And whereas other religions are often highly, how do I say, elevated and spiritualized. So like Buddhism becomes this thing that is healing, and Hinduism, I mean, yoga, which is not necessarily religion per se, but is a practice. All of these things become um, amplified. Things like, you talked about voodoo. In Trinidad, the equivalent is the Shango and spiritual Baptist religions, which are kind of that combination of Catholicism and Hinduism and um, the Ashanti religions. Um, they are often portrayed in these really incredibly negative ways, um, or they're pitted against the God of the Bible when there isn't necessarily a lot of discrepancy. The religions are very similar. Um, and we're not talking necessarily about religion here. Um, I do want to say that religion can be a part of spirituality for a lot of people. Um, and for other people, it may not be. Some people reject religion entirely. Some people go back and discover the religions of their ancestors, but everybody goes through a spiritual journey.
So for me, I really help clients to really, how do you um, get in touch for me with the God within, which is really your imagination, your intuition, and not really be fragmented where, like, your thoughts, your circumstances, everything can look at, oh, there's no reason to live, there's no reason to move on. But how can you tap into that power within by to self-care, self-love, self-forgiveness? And for me, those are all spiritual laws to
Yes.
really move on and be healed and and
Yes.
and accomplish, whatever purpose, you set and you design. Okay, because I believe that we are the architect who's designing that with the force that we cannot see. We can move on, and people can really accomplish, their heart desire and be mentally whole.
Yeah, that sense of purpose is so important. Um, and it really is sort of this kind of spiritual desire. And it feels universal. People think, I'm here. Why am I here? Um, what what is the reason for my journey on this earth? How can I contribute? Probably one of the strongest things, one of the strongest pieces of evidence that I have for my faith in God or interconnectedness, or whatever you want to call it, is an experience I had actually when I first came to the United States, which was very interesting. So I was in California, which was at that time 3 hours behind Trinidad. Um, this was the summer into the fall, and I'd just gotten to the United States, and I went to bed one night at 10 o'clock, around 10 o'clock at night, and at 11 o'clock, I jumped up terrified, which never happened to me. I never slept for 1 hour. I would sleep all night. Jumped up terrified about my grandparents. And my terror was so strong that I dropped to my knees and I started praying for them to be protected. I started praying because I was looking at the time and I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's 11 o'clock here. It's 2 o'clock in the morning over there. So I can't call them to ask them how they're doing. So there's nothing I can do but pray. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. I think I stayed on my knees for almost an hour. And then after that, I calmed down, got into bed, slept the rest of the night. 2 weeks later, my mom called me. She said, Karen, there's something I wanted to tell you, but we didn't want you to worry. So I waited for a little bit to tell you. But 2 weeks ago, burglars broke into your grandparents' house around 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, what? And she said, yep. So call your grandparents. So I called my grandparents, who are just fabulous people. And my grandmother, she was like, yes, they broke in and they were holding a gun to put your Popsy's head. Popsy's my grandfather. And I said, they asked us for money. And I said, if you want money, why are you coming here in the middle of the month? People get paid at the end of the month. We don't have any money in the middle of the month. Oh, my grandmother. She was wonderful. And then my grandfather, he said, he prayed actually a prayer from the Bible, from when Jesus Christ was on the cross. And he prayed, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And there was an old, a heavy iron shoe racket. You don't get those things these days. It was old and heavy, and it was filled with their shoes. And he picked up the shoe rack. I'm talking about a man in his late 70s. Picked up the shoe rack and threw it at these guys. And they ran. And the whole thing lasted probably a little bit less than an hour, because the guys had come in, they had tried to search for money. And then when they couldn't find the money, they woke up my grandparents and put a gun to my grandfather's head. And I have never forgotten that experience. And call it whatever you like out there in digital video land. I call it God's mercy, but no one has ever been able to explain to me how I jumped out of my sleep terrified and was compelled to pray for my grandparents while this was happening. And so my faith over time with that and many other experiences has become so strong. I know that there is a being, I call him God, who is looking after us, who is communicating with us, who is encouraging us to connect with and communicate with each other and protect each other. And that is, basically where my spiritual journey is now.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And oh my God, that's an amazing story. So it's really those things that we cannot explain, and that's why when I'm practicing, and I can let you talk a little bit more too about your practice and how you integrate that. I work with people of all faith, and
Yes.
of all faith, and what I found is that it doesn't matter if that person believe in like the voodoo, they call them loi, or spirits. It doesn't matter if they believe in those spirits. It doesn't matter if they believe in Jesus. It doesn't matter if they believe in Buddha or any kind of religion. If I can help them to connect to their faith, if I can help them to connect to that, knowing from within, knowing that you're not alone, you have a greater power that's
Yes.
working with you, I have better success at really helping them to recover quicker than if somebody is very skeptical, they don't believe in anything. So I don't know your experience in that, but that's really been my experience.
It's interesting working with people sort of in both realms. There are challenges on both ends because some people believe in a way that's very stuck, and sometimes even getting people into mental health practice, there's great harm that's done sometimes, or I've heard people preach that there's like no mental illness, that to be depressed is of the devil. I've heard that, as messages, and we have to counter those. And then there are people who do not believe in God, but do believe in the human connection. They believe in being very kind to everyone. They believe in, putting goodness into the world. And I learned how to take a spiritual history when I actually, after my psychiatric training, when I was doing my certification in global mental health, because having that purpose, even if you do not have a God, is so critical for people to improve their mood. So that is one thing that I really strongly believe in my practice, is what has the person's spiritual journey been? How does it show up in their lives? And how can they make it more meaningful as a part of their own healing of themselves? We are thinking in so many ways about principles and practical tools to incorporate the spiritual component for our patients, our clients. And taking a spiritual history is something that people don't think of at all. They will create a magnificent biological, psychological, and social history, and never, ever take into account the spiritual history. And that to me is a travesty.
I agree with that. For me, it's really connecting to who you are. So we really are interconnected. And that's the level of spirituality that I can work with someone, even if they have a religion or not religion, if they believe in God or not believing in God. Because for me, it's not about that at all. It's about really how do you connect them to you,
Hmm.
okay, the person that you are, and everybody can feel it from within. Because when we sit down, even you have any kind of mental issues, if you can, from your mind, okay, believing that yes, I do need the treatment, I do need to take this, but at the same time I have a purpose on this earth, and I can be healed, I can live, you're going to find ways that your brain going to bring you either ideas or ways to really be able to do what you need to do. So for me, that's kind of that X factor that I said, really, it's not a question of if you are in a religion or not. And what you said, really bringing that in and not leaving it out, that's for me, that's what the holistic view is.
Yeah, and I think in terms of spiritual practice in session, you know, a lot of one of the great things about spiritual practice is that it teaches us to tolerate being with ourselves, exploring our own thoughts, our own feelings. I know we're sort of talking about spiritual practices, and a lot of organized spiritual practices have rituals to them, which are actually very healing, as opposed to numbing activities. A numbing activity would be like mindless social media scrolling and just looking at watching, I don't know, kittens and babies forever, or arguing with people, right? On social media who don't believe what you believe, and then suddenly 2 hours have gone by, but you're just as exhausted and you haven't received any release or relief from whatever has been burdening you. Watching television for hours, people use food to numb, people use substances to numb. Um, People do for others to numb. It's very interesting that, you know, for people who struggle with substance use and who have achieved sobriety, they um often one of the first signs that people are beginning to struggle is that they cannot look inwards at themselves and their own spiritual practice and reflection. They have to look outwards at everybody around them and start fixing all the people around them. And that can be, as wonderful as it is, a way of numbing. So spiritual practice really connects you with your internal world. And it's critically important to do that, And I was just wondering, Edna, if besides the ones that are obvious, you have other tips for good spiritual practice.
So one of the practice, that it doesn't look, or people may not say, oh, this is a spiritual practice, but for me, it is spiritual practice. Deep breathing, deep breathing.
Yes.
Because deep breathing really, like, I'm not going to go, all the scientific, thing about it, but deep breathing really connect us to us. Tell someone to take a deep breath, okay? It's really communicating to our brain, so it's connect us to our body, okay? It's very integrative, connect us to our body, and really signaling to our brain that we are safe.
Yes,
Now,
absolutely. Mhm.
forgiveness, I always, tell people, and I know people talk about that, but actually I had, this experience, where I'm driving and this person, cut me off, and I started fuming. And then it's kind of like you have an epiphany, it's like, whew, calm down. Because here's the thing. I can be cursing that person, doing all these things, but who's feeling all those things? Me. My blood pressure is up. I'm pumping cortisol, the stress hormone into me. I'm poisoning me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm poisoning me when that person, probably in their own world, da 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 da, they're having fun. So for me, forgiveness, it's really one of those, from a spiritual practice of loving myself. I love myself so much that I'm not going to really, poison it by
Yes,
hating you or whatever. That doesn't mean we cannot be mad. All emotions. I said all emotions are good, but it's more like how do you really whatever happened you recover from that in a healthy way. So part of
exactly.
holistic, I include all those things when people come to me, so they can be healed. You know, internally.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Um, Self-compassion as well. So many times people come, and I'm sure you see this too in your practice, and they say things about themselves that they would never say about other people. They treat themselves in ways they would never treat other people. And, oftentimes I will reflect back in a session, okay, you know, if I were to tell you the story of your journey, what would you say to me? And the words that they would say to someone else would be so compassionate and, empathetic and, supportive. But then people cannot say those things to themselves. And it's so critically important to understand the importance of that compassion. You said forgiveness, you know, focusing on gratitude, all of these things actually heal us. They heal our spiritual wounds. And in our community, that is critically important. You know, I I want to just mention here that this is not easy to achieve, and sometimes it's very difficult for people to start looking inward. Like I said, it can be a sign that people are starting to relapse into binge eating disorder, into gambling, into one of these things, because it's so difficult to tolerate. So please, if you need help to do this, don't think you need to do it on your own. We're talking about interconnectedness here. And as human beings, we're interconnected. So please reach out to someone, reach out to Awaken to Mind, reach out to Beryllium Psychiatry, or whoever you feel comfortable with for guidance as you go through this journey of connecting with yourself spiritually.
Yes, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, Dr. Abdul, because so many times I find people come in and you try to say, "Oh, I try to meditate, I try to do this," and then really what they are doing, they are re-traumatizing themselves because
Mm-hmm.
people have really deep-seated trauma, especially sexual trauma and
Mm-hmm.
other trauma, and they are trying to go inward. It's really like their brain will not allow them to be
Oh,
safe, in that space. So that's where, when you said, really, if people feel that way, please, okay, it's okay. It's okay, but reach out for professional help. So I think it's the perfect time to really give the audience, the questions for thought. So, what does the word spirituality mean to you? So, you can put your comment on the chat and let us know, because today we talk about spirituality and what it's meant to us, and we would love to hear from you.
yes. So our challenge leads into our next topic, which is sleep and rest. And we're talking about restoration and rejuvenation. Because sleep is not always restorative, as we know. And so our challenge to you is for 7 days, take a break for 5 minutes at midday to rest. Doesn't necessarily mean lying down and sleeping, but to take a break, maybe to breathe. If you can't tolerate anything else, just breathe and just rest for 5 minutes. Notice the challenges you have with doing this. And we encourage you, as always, to journal about the challenges and the successes and see what you can do to overcome the challenges.
It was a pleasure again also to be with you, Dr. Abdul, and thank you to everybody who listened to us today. So we appreciate you, and we look forward to our session on sleep and restoration.